My name is Mary, and I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class family, where everything went according to schedule, where everyone knew their responsibilities and followed the unspoken rules set over the years. Mom worked as an accountant at a local firm, methodically sorting out figures and reports, and Dad was a project manager at a construction company, returning home tired every day, but always ready to read the evening news or discuss the next project he was working on. And then there was Daisy, my younger sister, who was exactly 3 years behind me, but that didn't stop her from being the center of attention in our house, especially in the eyes of her parents. "Mary, you need to set the best example for your sister." These words, spoken by my mother, have accompanied me since childhood, and the older I got, the more clearly they sounded in my head, like a broken record repeated over and over again, whether it was cleaning the room, getting good grades, or even just basic behavior. The demands on me have always been higher, and I was well aware that, as the eldest daughter, I had to meet high expectations, even if I didn't like it. I remember one night when I was 16 and Daisy was 13. We were sitting at the dinner table, each preoccupied with her own business. I was poring over a calculus textbook, trying to figure out another complex equation, and Daisy was drawing something in her notebook, presumably working on an English essay. Suddenly, she sighed and, putting down her pencil, complained, "I don't want to write this essay, it's too difficult." Mom, hearing this, immediately looked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her invariable apron, and, smiling, said in a soft voice, "Oh, honey, it's okay. You're trying your best, maybe you can work on it tomorrow when you feel more inspired." I couldn't help but chuckle, remembering how different the reaction was when I myself struggled with a similar task last week. At that time, my mother didn't even try to comfort me, but only sternly told me that I had to focus and finish the job, because my future depended on it. The tone of her voice was completely different, as if completely different demands were being made on me, and it was, to put it mildly, insulting. "No," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I just solved the problem." "Well, focus on your work," Mom replied, as if she hadn't noticed my hidden irritation. "You know you need to keep good grades if you want to go to a decent college." It was another sore point that I didn't want to talk about. Since I was a child, I dreamed of going to Princeton. Their computer science program was legendary, and I did my best to achieve this goal. I worked like hell to maintain a 4.0 grade point average, participated in all possible extracurricular activities, founded a programming club at our high school. I did everything to stand out from the rest of the applicants. But as soon as I mentioned Princeton in my 3rd year, my parents rejected the idea. "Mary, be realistic," Dad said one day at dinner, without even giving me a chance to explain his arguments. "Private colleges are too expensive, and we need to save money for Daisy's education. You know, she might need some extra support. Your grades are good enough to get a scholarship to one of the state universities." Later that night, I sat in my room, staring at a Princeton brochure that I had managed to get during one of the school's trades fairs. There were photos of spacious campuses, student laboratories, inspiring quotes from successful graduates, and it seemed to me that it was there, among these ancient walls, among these ambitious people, that my real place was. At that moment, Sarah, my best friend, came into the room, and when she saw me in this state, she crossed her legs and sat next to me. "They rejected your idea, didn't they?" she asked sympathetically. "Yes," I sighed, tossing the brochure aside. "In their opinion, should be realistic and think about Daisy's future." Sarah frowned, but said nothing. "You know they want me to join the state," I continued, not hiding my bitterness. She nodded. I took the brochure back, ran my eyes over the pages, and tightened my grip on it. "Okay," I finally said, looking up. "I'm going to join the staff. But I'm going to make it work for me. I will prove that I can succeed on my own terms." At that moment, sitting in my room, surrounded by study materials and the support of my best friend, I made an unspoken pact with myself. I won't let circumstances determine my future. I will succeed, not in spite of the restrictions imposed on me by my parents, but because of them. They taught me one valuable lesson: if I want something in this life, I will have to achieve it myself. The state university turned out to be exactly the place where I was able to truly open up, plunging into the study of programming with my head, spending long hours in a computer laboratory, absorbing every bit of knowledge, improving my skills, and constantly striving for more. Unlike many students who went to parties after class or just spent time on campus, I stayed up late, working hard on code, trying new technologies, learning advanced development techniques, knowing that this was my future, that this would give me a chance to prove to myself and the world that I was capable of more. During my last year at university, I had an idea that, oddly enough, haunted me day and night, flashing into my head all of a sudden when I once again watched people around me, immersed in their routine, struggling with a multitude of tasks, trying to get everything done. But they invariably face a lack of time and disorganization. I understood that the world was changing, technology was evolving, but time management remained a serious problem for many, and then, one of those late nights, when my eyes were watering with fatigue and the laptop screen illuminated an empty classroom, I began to sketch the first sketches of the structure that later turned into Taskmaster, a revolutionary task management application, which changed my whole life. Working on Taskmaster became my obsession, my meaning, something that consumed me completely, which did not allow me to be distracted by vacations, parties, or even banal weekends when other students were having fun, and I spent hours debugging code, bringing every detail to perfection, testing, rewriting, testing again, encountering making mistakes and finding ways to fix them. It felt like the whole world had narrowed down to this one idea, and I couldn't afford to let it go. After graduating from university, I had a choice between following the beaten path and accepting one of the job offers I received from various companies, or taking a chance and trying to turn my application into something more than just a graduation project. I chose to take a risk. Instead of getting a stable job, I started offering Taskmaster to various technology companies, sent presentations, and tried to get in touch with investors, but most either simply ignored me or politely but categorically refused. But then something happened that I didn't expect. One of the biggest tech giants showed interest. I still remember the day when I was sitting in a spacious conference room surrounded by people in expensive suits who were flipping through my designs, testing the application, discussing its prospects, until the CEO, leaning forward slightly, finally said, "This is an impressive job." The negotiations that followed were intense. Every word, every clause of the contract was discussed down to the smallest detail, but when it was over, I left this office with a contract worth $5 million. I remember looking at my bank account balance, feeling my hands tremble, as reality suddenly became somehow unreal, as the numbers in front of my eyes seemed something alien, unthinkable, but at the same time the most real. First of all, I bought myself a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood, finally allowing myself a space where everything belonged only to me. Then I invested some of the money in starting my own mobile app development company, realizing that this chance should not be missed, that I had the opportunity to build something more. The rest of the money went into savings and investments. I was not going to waste money, realizing that success, no matter how sudden it was based only on perseverance and foresight. When I informed my parents and Daisy about the deal, their reaction was, "Interesting. $5 million. My mother whispered, clearly shocked, before sinking into a chair, as if she was afraid that her legs would give out. Dad just sat there, shaking his head as if trying to make sense of what was said, and Daisy looked at me with an expression that I couldn't decipher, either surprise or something else, more complicated. Everything has changed in our family since that moment. Now I was no longer just a responsible older sister, now I was a millionaire, and as it turned out, it meant a lot more than I thought. It's been 2 years since I sold Taskmaster, and then, during one of the traditional Sunday dinners, Daisy suddenly dropped a bomb. "I'm getting married," she announced, holding a fork in her hand and looking at us with shining eyes. Tom proposed. I was genuinely happy for her. Tom was a good guy, caring, reliable, and Daisy really looked happy. Her voice was soft, and there was genuine excitement in it. Congratulations, I said, smiling. Have you thought about the wedding date yet? She nodded, telling me something about the plans, the details, but before she could talk about it herself, I offered her $20,000 to organize the wedding, realizing that it would be a good help for her. Mom cleared her throat, and then, with that expression that always meant she was choosing her words carefully, she said, "You know, Mary, weddings are very expensive these days." I looked at them with slight confusion, not quite understanding what this conversation was about. 20,000 is generous, of course, Daisy said, her voice taking on that special melodious tone that I remembered from childhood, the very tone she used to get her way, making it a little plaintive, a little demanding. "But, you know, this is my only wedding. Don't you want your little sister to have her dream honeymoon?" I remained silent, waiting for her to say next. "We were looking at one amazing resort in the Maldives," she added, tilting her head to the side with a smile. I sat there, feeling the familiar, almost tangible pressure of their expectations, the same feeling that had haunted me since childhood, when more was expected of me than Daisy, when any achievement I achieved was perceived not as a personal victory, but as another argument in favor of sharing, helping, and supporting, provide. The fact is that they weren't completely wrong. I could really afford more, and despite my inner protest, I understood that Daisy's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and her happiness was certainly worth the money invested in it. After several discussions, accompanied by subtle hints and artfully woven provocative words, I stumbled, but still agreed to pay for their honeymoon at a luxury resort, adding this to the already donated $20,000 for the wedding. After the wedding and their return from the Maldives, a pattern began to appear in my family's behavior that I had studiously ignored before, convincing myself that I just felt like I was winding myself up, that I was looking for a hidden meaning where there was none. But the further I went, the more obvious it became that my financial situation had turned into something more than just a convenient reason for my parents to be proud. Now it has become a kind of inexhaustible resource that can be used, a resource that can be accessed over and over again, hiding behind family ties and reminding me that I am only fulfilling my role in their lives. At first, it was subtle, veiled, hidden behind innocent jokes and casual comments, but with each passing week it became more and more obvious. When I gave my mom a designer bag for her birthday, which she seemed to really want, she smiled and thanked me, but then, with a barely noticeable sigh, she added, "Oh, that's sweet." Although I saw a more beautiful one in the window of that luxury boutique in the city center. But, of course, this one is also lovely. Dad was no better. When I helped him fix his car by paying $1,000 for a new gearbox, he chuckled and said, "You know, for someone who makes millions, you're pretty stingy." I could have spent another $1,000 on new tires, but it's still a small thing for you. I understood that they weren't serious, that they were just words spoken in a joking manner, but every time I gave something, I felt as if they weren't evaluating my gesture, not my intentions, but only the numbers behind it, as if everything I could offer it to my family, it was measured exclusively by zeros in my bank account. One Sunday afternoon, when I was sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, sipping coffee, she casually mentioned, "You know, your sister really loved that coffee maker you gave her for a housewarming party, although recently she saw one amazing fully automatic coffee machine that would be perfect for their morning routines." I put the cup down on the table, maybe a little too hard. "Mom, this coffee maker cost $500. "Well, yes." She shrugged her shoulders, as if she were talking about something completely insignificant, but when you have as many as you have, what are a few hundred more between sisters? She was talking about Daisy, who returned from her honeymoon with Tom 3 months ago, and, what really surprised me was that she was still living with her parents. It seemed strange, because Tom had a pretty decent job in finance, and Daisy got a job as a marketing coordinator. Yes, the starting salaries weren't fabulous, but they should have been enough to rent their own homes. One evening, while helping Daisy sort through the rubble in her room, the same room that hadn't changed much since her school days, I finally asked, "Why don't you guys look for your own place to live?" She flopped down on the bed, surrounded by bags from expensive boutiques, and rolled her eyes, saying, "Ugh, have you seen the rental prices lately? This is ridiculous. We'd just be throwing money away." "But you both have jobs," I reminded her, feeling a slight irritation rise inside. "Mary, not everyone can just buy an apartment like you," she interrupted me, rolling her eyes again. "Some of us have to be practical." I started to answer, but stopped, looking at her manicure, which was clearly not done in a cheap salon, at the sky-high price tags sticking out of her new designer handbags, at the shoes that probably cost like someone's monthly salary. The irony of her statement about practicality did not escape me. Mom didn't lag behind either. Every family dinner now necessarily included comments about the housing market, which were served with such an expression on their faces, as if it were a matter of life and death. "Did you see that the tiny house on that street sold for $500,000? She sighed, shaking her head. "It's a crime, what they take these days. Normal people can't afford to buy anything anymore." She always emphasized this, normal people, accompanying her words with meaningful glances in my direction. During one of these dinners, Mom sighed heavily, put down her fork, and looked first at me, then at Daisy and Tom, as if considering how best to formulate her thoughts. "You know, Mary, when your father and I bought this house, everything was completely different," she began in the same tone that usually foreshadowed a long nostalgic speech. "Young couples could really afford to buy their own homes, the market was completely different, prices were reasonable, mortgage interest was not so extortionate. And now..." She waved her hand expressively in the direction of Daisy and Tom, who, as if on cue, depicted equally sad expressions on their faces. "These poor kids have no chance with a market like this." I took a sip of wine, suppressing my irritation. I already knew where this conversation was heading, and I knew that no matter what words it was veiled in, its essence would remain unchanged. A few days later, I stopped by my parents' house on Sunday afternoon, using the spare key I always had. Upon entering the house, I immediately felt a strange atmosphere, an almost tangible tension, and froze when I saw the scene in front of me. The whole family, Mom, Dad, Daisy, and Tom, were sitting at the dining room table, huddled over some papers that were spread out everywhere. They were discussing something animatedly, exchanging phrases in low voices, and when they noticed me, they suddenly fell silent, and it seemed to me that there was awkwardness in the air. "Oh, Mary, we weren't expecting you today," Mom said, her voice sounding too happy, strained. I noticed how she hurriedly swept several sheets off the table, and Dad, without even looking at me, put the remaining papers in a folder. But I still managed to see that they were printouts of mortgage rates and house listings. "I just thought I'd stop by," I replied, looking around at their faces in an attempt to catch the mood. It's okay," Daisy chirped, but something in her tone alerted me. There was something strange in her voice, elusive, but clearly present. I didn't insist. I didn't ask if they had finally decided to buy a house, because that was their business. Maybe Tom's parents had offered to help, or maybe they had saved up enough money for the down payment themselves. Anyway, I was just glad that they were finally planning to move out. 2 weeks later, my mom called me. "Mary, we need to have an important family conversation. Can you come over tomorrow night?" I immediately remembered her recent complaints about the refrigerator. She talked about him all the time, how he made strange noises, how his ice maker broke, how the food didn't stay fresh long enough. When I arrived the next day, the atmosphere in the house was strangely formal. The whole family was gathered in the living room. Mom and Dad were sitting on the couch, Daisy and Tom were sitting in armchairs, and there was an empty seat in front of them, clearly reserved for me. I sat up, glancing at their faces, and felt a surge of unease inside. "Mary," Daisy began, sounding unusually serious. "We had some family conversations." I nodded, expecting to hear a request for a new refrigerator. "Tom and I have decided that it's time for us to get our own house." I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for her. "That's great," I said, looking her straight in the eye. Definitely the right decision. Daisy exchanged glances with our parents before continuing. Well, since you're so successful now and you have more money than you know what to do with. She hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words. We decided that you should buy us a house. There was silence in the room. I stared at her, sure I'd misheard her. I'm sorry, what? That makes sense. Daisy seemed to gain momentum, inspired by her speech. You already have your own place, you bought yourself an apartment, right? Meanwhile, I'm still living with my mom and dad. It's unfair. I looked around the room, expecting someone to laugh, to say that it was a joke, that it was just a prank, but everyone's faces were completely serious. I took a slow breath. I don't understand, I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. Why would I buy you a house? Well, Daisy's voice became a little more strained, but she quickly regained her composure. You're my sister. I blinked at him. You live in your own beautiful apartment, and I'm stuck here, she continued. You have millions in the bank, but I need my own place, and I'm not going to spend money on rent. You have the means to help me, so you have to. It took me a moment to find something to say. She said it with absolute confidence, without a shadow of doubt, as if it were not a request, but a demand, as if it were an obvious, non-negotiable decision. I looked at my parents. They were silent. No one said a word. No one even thought to say that it was wrong, that it was not my responsibility. I looked at Tom. He just looked away, not interfering. I looked at Daisy. She looked at me expectantly, as if she already knew that I would agree. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, barely suppressing the irritation that was rising in me like a slowly burning flame, and, trying to speak in an even voice, I said, I'll tell you what I can do. If you need money for a down payment, I can provide an interest-free loan. We will make it right, through my lawyer, everything will be legal and official. Daisy jumped up from her chair, her face flushed with indignation, and something almost malicious flashed in her eyes. Are you kidding? Her voice trembled with rage. You're just jealous of me because I'm happily married, and you're alone, sitting with your precious money and nobody needs you. The accusation hit me like a slap in the face. I jerked my head up, feeling my heart thud in my chest. I gave you $20,000 for your wedding, my voice sounded firm, but I could feel anger boiling inside. I've paid for your honeymoon in the Maldives. This money could cover my own living expenses for a year. Oh, that's it. Daisy rolled her eyes and laughed sarcastically. Poor Mary, always counting pennies, despite her millions. I froze in disbelief. You're pathetic, she continued, defiantly crossing her arms over her chest. I deserve every flavor I have. I held back my anger, slowly getting up from the chair. I built my company from scratch, my words sounded clear and harsh. I live within my means, I invest in a business, I am responsible for my employees, for the people who depend on me. Mom sighed heavily, and her face reflected the same disappointment that I remembered from childhood, the expression she made whenever she thought I had failed them. I'm ashamed of you, Mary, she said, shaking her head. How can you be so stingy? I laughed incredulously, but there was no joy in that laugh. Over the past few months, I've given Daisy more money than most people earn in a year. But Mom just shook her head. And yet you live in your nice apartment, while your sister has to live with her parents. Dad, who had been silent before, finally spoke up. I looked around the room, looking at their familiar faces, at these people who raised me, who have been by my side all my life, and suddenly realized that they no longer see me as a person, just a purse. Daisy stood up, slowly smoothing the hem of her expensive designer dress, and I suddenly remembered that it was my birthday present to her. This is how it's going to work, she said, looking me straight in the eye. Either you buy us a house, a good house, not some cheap beginner's house, or She paused to make her words sound more weighty. Or you will no longer be part of our family. It's your choice. I looked at Mom and Dad. They nodded, making it clear that they shared her position. Tom sat in silence, looked confused, but did not object. I looked at them, at the people who were my family, and slowly felt everything inside me grow cold. Without saying another word, I picked up my purse and walked to the door. "Mary," my mother shouted, her voice rising to a screech. "Don't you dare come out of that door." I froze, holding on to the door handle, but didn't turn around. Walking out of that door meant losing my family. But staying meant losing yourself. I opened the door and left their angry voices behind, let them follow me, let them remain in the past, like everything I once called family. The bombing started almost immediately after I left. My phone wouldn't stop, it was constantly vibrating with messages and calls from Mom and Daisy. I didn't answer. But when the sleepless night turned to morning, I finally read some of the messages. The first one is from Mom. "How dare you turn your back on your family like that?" And the following. "After all we've done for you." This phrase, it hooked me the most. I abruptly picked up the phone and pressed the call button without hesitation. Mom answered instantly, as if she was sitting and waiting for my call. "What the hell, Mary?" she began before I could even speak. I pulled myself together, but my voice was still shaking with anger. "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated slowly. "Like what, Mom?" She trailed off, but I didn't give her time to come up with an answer. "When I wanted to go to Princeton, you told me to figure it out for myself. When I needed help with college, you said I should be independent. I worked 3 part-time jobs during college, just to afford a tiny apartment with roommates, sharing it with 3 people, trying to make ends meet, saving on everything from food to textbooks, because every penny I saved meant that I would take another step towards my dream. We raised you," my mother screamed into the phone, her voice trembling with emotion, anger, and frustration. "We were putting food on the table. We dressed you up." I clutched the phone tighter in my hand, feeling anger rise in my throat. "It's called being a parent, Mom," I said coldly, trying to keep control. "That's the minimum you should have done. Everything else, my education, my success, my company, I built it myself. While you were saving up for college for Daisy, I was working like hell to forge my own path." Aunt Linda's birthday was next weekend, and despite everything that had happened, I almost went. I knew the whole family would be there. I knew a meeting with Mom, Dad, and Daisy was inevitable, but Aunt Linda was always kind to me, and I didn't want to miss her party. Because of the family drama. When I arrived at the restaurant, my parents and Daisy were already there, sitting at the far end of the long table. I chose a seat next to Aunt Linda, as far away from them as possible, and for a while everything seemed polite, just exchanging pleasantries, talking about the weather, discussing work and travel, but then the toasts began. Aunt Linda's friends had just finished a touching speech about what a wonderful woman she was when Mom suddenly stood up, clutching a glass of wine in her hand. Her cheeks were flushed, and I immediately realized that she had already drunk several glasses. "I'd like to say something," she announced, her voice sounding too loud for the cozy room, too harsh. I felt my stomach tighten. "About ungrateful children who forget where they came from," Mom continued, her voice dripping with bitterness. There was a deathly silence in the room. I saw the horror reflected on Aunt Linda's face, as several guests exchanged glances, clearly feeling awkward. "My daughter Mary," Mom made a dramatic pause, and I felt rage rising in my chest. "She's sitting here in her expensive clothes, with millions in the bank, while her own sister needs a home and refuses to help her family." I involuntarily clenched my jaw. "She's become a selfish, greedy person. That's enough for her." "Helen." Aunt Linda jumped up, her voice firm. "This is neither the time nor the place." But Mom didn't stop. "She owes us everything," her voice rang out in the silence. And now she doesn't even want to help her only sister buy a decent house. Oh my God, Cousin Rachel whispered next to me, shaking her head slightly. Is she serious? And before I could say anything, Daisy jumped, her voice rising on a high note. She made me go to a lawyer to sign a contract before even thinking about helping with the down payment. I slowly stood up, and the sound of my chair scraping across the floor echoed through the hall. I gave you $20,000 for the wedding, my voice sounded muffled, but I saw Daisy flinch. I paid for your honeymoon. You want me to buy you a whole house, I added, looking her straight in the eye. The rest of the guests sat in stunned silence, forks frozen halfway to their mouths, while the years of marital distress played out in front of them like a cheap soap opera. I know Mary was more than generous, Aunt Linda said firmly, and I felt a wave of relief. Last year, she helped pay for Tommy's diabetes treatment, and Sarah for college and books. And not just them, Cousin Mike suddenly spoke up. She helped me fix my car. She paid for my emergency dental surgery, Aunt Sarah chimed in. And with each new example, Mom's face became redder and redder, her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightened around the glass. So she helps everyone except her sister? Daisy screamed, her voice piercing the room like a knife. I couldn't take it anymore. I went up to Aunt Linda, leaned over, hugged her tightly, and whispered, I'm so sorry about what happened. Happy birthday. And then I turned around and left, hearing the arguing voices die down behind me, but no longer feeling the pain. I later found out that the party was essentially over as soon as I left, and the guests quickly found excuses to leave, leaving my parents and Daisy stewing in their own indignation. A couple of days later, several relatives called me to offer support, and I felt relieved knowing that not everyone in the family considered me a cash cow. And so, 2 days after the birthday disaster, a Facebook notification caught my attention. Rachel's cousin tagged me in a comment. Mary, you need to see this. I clicked on the link leading to my mother's page, and the moment her post appeared in front of me, everything inside me stopped, as if an invisible hand squeezed my chest, preventing me from breathing. It was a public statement, written in a solemn, almost official tone, but every line cut into me like a knife. It is with a heavy heart that John and I officially disown our eldest daughter Mary. Her selfishness and ingratitude showed us that she cares more about money than about her family. From this day on, we have only one daughter, our beloved Daisy. I felt the blood drain from my face as my eyes ran over those words, those alien, cruel letters that were once supposed to mean love. The post has already garnered dozens of comments, and most of them belong to family friends, people who have known me since childhood, watched me grow up, sat with us at festive tables, and now wrote with expressed shock and confusion. How come? I don't believe it. Mary has always been such a good girl. What happened? I sat staring at the screen, feeling strangely calm, cold, and detached, as if it wasn't happening to me. They finally did it. They turned their emotional manipulations into a public spectacle, played out this farce in front of the whole world, hoping that I would be overcome with shame, that I would return on my knees, begging them to forgive me for a crime I did not commit. But it won't work. I didn't think twice. I've blocked them all. Mom, Dad, Daisy, even Tom. Phones, social media, email, everything. It was like cauterizing a wound, painful but necessary. 2 months of blessed silence have passed. I threw myself into my work, completed a new project, hired 5 more employees, signed up for therapy and began to heal, sorting out all the pain that I had been carrying for years, gradually letting it go, layer by layer. And then there was a call from Aunt Linda. Mary, her voice was worried, and I immediately felt the tension. Your mother tried to contact you. I closed my eyes, already knowing what I was going to hear next. She says it's urgent. She seems desperate. I took a break, but before I could say anything, my phone vibrated again, an unknown number. Somehow, I immediately realized who it was. Mary. Mom's voice was muffled by tears. She sounded plaintive, pleading, broken. Please don't hang up. I was silent, waiting. Everything is falling apart. Her voice trembled. We're going to lose the house. The loan we took for Daisy's wedding. We used the house as collateral. I felt my fingers tighten on the phone. We can't pay anymore. She paused, and then, as if finishing, added, Your father lost his job. We're barely making ends meet. Silence. Please, Mary, her voice broke. We need help. You are our only hope. I grinned, but there was no joy in the sound. Am I your only hope? I repeated slowly, as if I were chewing these words. I thought you only have one daughter now. Mom sighed sharply. Irritation appeared in her voice. You forced us, she snapped. If you had just helped your sister, this wouldn't have happened. Now I'm a stranger to you, Mom, I interrupted her, not allowing her to continue the accusations. And strangers can't demand money from me. Her voice became disgusting, harsh, predatory. How dare you call your mother a stranger? I felt my lips twitch in a sarcastic smile. Aren't you ashamed? And then a bitter laugh burst out of my chest, cold, mixed with relief and fatigue. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. You publicly disowned your daughter because she wouldn't buy your other daughter a house. A mother does not renounce her child because of money. A mother does not try to manipulate and shame her daughter into submission. I took a last pause, giving her a chance to say something, but she remained silent. You've made your choice, I said firmly. Now live with it. I hung up before she could answer. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was unwavering. The truth came out 3 months later, during a Sunday brunch with Aunt Linda. She was slowly stirring her coffee, her gaze calm but penetrating. Your father is not unemployed, she finally said. I froze. He just switched to a part-time job because he wanted to balance work and personal life. I felt a chill run down my spine. And there's no bank threatening to take their house away from them. I blinked, not immediately realizing the meaning of those words. They came up with this to force you to give them money, she concluded, looking at me with slight regret. I should have been angry. I should have felt the pain. Instead, I felt strangely relieved. The manipulation was so blatant, so transparent, that somehow everything became clearer. Through family rumors, which still found a way to get to me, I found out that Daisy and Tom had finally moved out of their parents' house and into a rented apartment. Apparently, they were saving up for their housing, doing exactly what they should have been doing all along. They still talk about you at every family meeting, my cousin Rachel told me over lunch, lazily stirring a cocktail in her glass and watching my reaction. I just raised an eyebrow. Daisy talks all the time about her selfish millionaire sister who didn't want to help her own family, she continued, feigning grief on her face. And how do others react to this? I asked, not really surprised that I was still being used as the main topic of discussion. Rachel laughed honestly. Most people now just try not to invite them, she said with a shrug. No one wants to spend the holidays listening to them complain about you and their hard life. It was at that moment, during a conversation with Rachel, that something clicked inside me. I've spent years trying to prove to my family that I'm a good daughter, that I'm trying, that I deserve their approval. I was torn between the desire to belong and the fear of losing, between trying to keep my love and the need to protect myself. But their love always came with conditions, with price tags, with endless demands. And I wasn't going to play this game anymore. That same evening, I made a decision. I called Sophie, my former college roommate, who now worked as a personal stylist and ran a successful business helping women gain confidence through outward change. I need a change, I told her. Complete transformation. She wasn't even surprised. With pleasure. The next few months were a whirlwind of changes. Sophie helped me update my entire wardrobe, replacing the practical clothes of a programmer with things that made me feel confident and strong, clothes in which I walked forward instead of hiding in the shadows. I started going to a cosmetologist who developed the perfect skin care for me, and for the first time in a long time, looking in the mirror, I saw myself radiant, healthy, and alive. I got a new haircut, shorter, bolder, sharper, reflecting the changes not only in appearance, but also inside me. But that wasn't the main change. I started saying yes to everything I hadn't had the courage to do before. When my friend Jessica suggested a spontaneous trip to Paris, I didn't come up with excuses, I just bought a ticket. When my programmer friend Mark invited me to join his rock climbing group, I gave it a chance, even though I hadn't even thought about something like this before. I expanded my social circle by joining a book club and a women's entrepreneurial network, met women who inspired me, studied with them, shared my experiences, and for the first time felt like I belonged to something real. I started mentoring young programmers, especially girls who reminded me of myself at their age, those who didn't know where to start, who doubted themselves, but were burning with ideas and dreams. My company continued to grow, but now it wasn't just a job, it was my passion, my strength, my legacy. I found myself surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them. It's been a year since my mom's Facebook post, and suddenly I got an invitation to my cousin Tommy's wedding. My parents were supposed to be there. Daisy should have been there. But for the first time, that thought didn't scare me. Recently, last week, I was sorting through old photos and came across one from my college graduation. I barely recognized the girl in the picture. She was so desperate to please. I was so hungry for approval. I was so afraid to stand up for myself. I thought about how she would feel if she knew where she would end up. Successful. Strong. Free. I took this picture and hung it in a frame on my desk. Not as a reminder of what I've lost, and as a reminder of what I've gained. Sometimes leaving is not the end. This is the beginning. Sometimes the family you were born into is not the family you're meant to keep. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is simply saying no to those who treat your boundaries like offers and your love like an ATM.